Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 49 and 50 of Steven Universe, The Return and Jailbreak. Now, like with the Lapis Lazuli two-parter, the plots of these episodes are a lot more intertwined than other episodes, and as a result, what happens in one episode directly leads into what happens in the next. As such, like with the Lapis Lazuli two-parter, instead of looking at these two episodes as two separate entities that I can judge on their own merits, I'm going to be instead looking at them both as one episode. So, just giving you a heads up. But anyway, let's start off with a return. And this episode begins with a return. So in this case, this episode is the one where Peridot makes good on the threat that Lapis Lazuli made, as the ship as the crystal gems can see a ship entering Earth's atmosphere that looks like a giant hand, and it is pointing directly at Beach City. As such, while the gems are doing their best to defend against it, even getting the gaggle of laser light cannons and blasting and trying to blast the ship, unfortunately, it doesn't really seem to be doing anything. In fact, when they even try and blast it, it doesn't even all it does is really just give them the hand, and the blast just bounce right off of it. As such, the gems realize that this is probably going to be a one-sided battle, but unfortunately, that also means that there could be collateral damage, especially since if they can't stop this thing, they'll probably reach Beach City, and Beach City is full of civilians. As such, Steven, using his political connections, does end up calling Mayor Dewey and tells him to get Beach City evacuated, which he does as he rallies everyone in Beach City and tells them that they gotta get out just to be safe. However, as Steven is preparing to stay and fight with the Crystal Gems, he sees the gems helping Greg pack, and at first Steven thinks it's a good idea, get his dad out of there, make sure that he's not hurt, but they also see that they've given Greg Steven's cheeseburger backpack. Yeah, they plan to send Steven with Greg. While Steven doesn't really want to go because, well, he wants to stay and help, Garnet ends up giving Steven his megaphone and pretty much gives him a pep talk about how, while they may treat him like a human child, he's essentially the heart of their group. He's their spirit. His voice can lift up their spirit, can lift them up, and right now he needs to be the voice for Beach City because there's a chance they might fall, and so he's got to carry on the fight if they aren't around, which Steven accepts, albeit slightly reluctantly. As such, he gets loaded up with Greg into Greg's van, and they both end up joining their denizens of Beach City as they leave, with the Crystal Gems kind of essentially emotionally prepping themselves for Steven leaving before they get ready to continue fighting, trying to stop Peridot's ship from landing. In the meantime, Steven and Greg are just talking, and Steven is of course lamenting what he can do, and he thinks that maybe Peridot, once she reaches Earth, might actually might end up liking it here. Actually, might like the people and decide to just go away, do her own thing. But Greg makes a comment that maybe wish that you're just like your mother. She thought she wanted similar things, but they didn't listen the last time they were here. As such, Steven kind of does want more clarification on this, and Greg tries to dance around it, saying the gems didn't want to tell you. They, of course, why would they? They didn't want you seeing them like that. And Steven's like, seeing them like what? At which point, Greg is trying to say, look, it would happen thousands of years ago. It's not like I was there. But, of course, Steven is still probing. Sorry, dinner. And so Greg finally admits it. And this is kind of where we get a summation, somewhat confirmation that the series of things that the show has kind of shown a case up to this point. The gems are aliens. Okay, yeah, there wasn't really much in the way of a secret in that regard, because they've talked about off-planet travel with the warp pads. They mentioned how they fought off the homeworld gems and won, and ultimately what they did. And so it's not a secret that they're aliens. What this does, and as such, really, what Greg is telling Steven is just essentially just a summation of what we know before, and just outright confirming it. However, what this also does showcase is another little tidbit. When Rose mentioned how she fought back, when it was mentioned that Rose fought back against the homeworld gems, you were never told just how big a scale the conflict was. All you really knew was that the homeworld gems were making soldiers. What you don't know is that ultimately what the damage would have been, because it turns out all gems came to Earth to conquer, not just a select group. All gems. Apparently, the gems came to Earth with the intent on doing harm to it. They pretty much invaded and were just planning to set up shop here and just turn the Earth into their personal harvesting ground. Rose did not like that, and as such, she rallied an army, not just a group, an army of gems to rally against the homeworld gems, and it led to a war. A very big war. One with many casualties on both sides, both human and gem, and by the end, while Rose's side came out on top, it was not without heavy casualties. Hence why the only living members of the crystal gems we've seen throughout the series have been Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl. They are literally the only survivors of Rose's army. Excuse me a second. Sorry about that. Shindy was adjusting. Put simply, everything. That's all. Which this is also supposed to be where the corruption came in. We don't learn the details about that till a later episode. But put simply, yeah, it wasn't just a battle. It was a great war. Many people died, and even Greg admits that if it wasn't for Rose's shield, there's a chance that the crystal gems we would know today wouldn't even be around. And as Steven hears this information, you can just see his look of curiosity and sadness turn to abject horror, because he didn't realize the severity of what they were really going up against. It's not just a group of good guys versus a group of bad guys. It is a group of rebels who fought a war against their own people and are now just barely holding on. Like he said, and like we learned in the previous episode, Peridot has technology that the gems do not understand, and they're already few, and combined with their small numbers in comparison to an entire planet of beings who have similar abilities to them but with superior technology and who do not give one bit about human life. Yeah, put simply, the odds are very much stacked against their favor, and Steven quickly realizes that there's a very good chance that without him there, Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl are not going to be walking away in one piece, if at all. As such, Steven just starts outright demanding that Greg turn the van around, which Greg refuses, but ultimately, Steven gets so upset that he ends up to emphasizing his point, ends up punching the dashboard of the van, which causes Steven's airbag to blow up and Steven to get ejected out of the van. Thankfully, his bubble protected him, but as a result, after getting knocked out of the van, Steven does tell Greg he has to go back. They need him. And Greg, while reluctant, does decide to let Steven go because it's what he wants to do, and he can't he realizes the severity of it. As such, getting a quick ride from Lion, Steven rides back to Beach City, even trying to give Connie a quick call to say that something big's going down. So call him back when he gets a chance. Yeah, he just leaves a message. But thanks to Lion's teleporting roar, he manages to get to the temple just as the ship is getting close to landing. And he can see the gems are still trying to stop it, and in this case we see that Pearl and Amethyst have fused into Opal and are trying to shoot it with the light arrows, but unfortunately even those aren't working, and the gems are quickly realizing we are outclassed, and we're outclassed. And they try to think, oh, it's fine, at least Steven's safe, until Steven lets him know that he's right there, which shocks Opal so much that she unfuses back into Pearl and Amethyst. As such, they try to tell Steven that he's got to go, but unfortunately it's too little too late, as the ship finally lands, and what I kind of find amusing is that when it lands, it literally just opens up its hand, and from it you see a little pod come out, and it's here we meet our invaders. Peridot, obviously, Lapis, who it turns out was pretty much brought along as a prisoner because she actually has intel on the Earth, and the hired help that Peridot brought with her to ensure the crystal gems would stop screwing with her things. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Jasper, a big, burly gem that's meant to be a quartz soldier, similar to Amethyst and Rose, except whereas Rose is all pink and bubbly and charming, and Amethyst is a little fun-loving shrimp. Jasper is big, buff, burly, and ready to kick your ass. Her very first scene is her design from her very first scene, you can tell that this is someone you don't want to mess with. She has long hair that looks like it's kind of unkempt, but definitely if it looks like and definitely looks just rough. She has a face that just looks angry and solemn. She has a stance of a warrior. She's every single inch of her is muscle. She has a stern face. She has a rough voice that does not have a single hint of humanity or friendliness in it. She is pretty much just here to wreck your shit, and she does not care how much she has to do it. So, big bad. As such, once Peridot, Lapis, and Jasper come out, Peridot points to the crystal gems and tells Jasper, "Those are the ones. Those are the gems that keep wrecking my things." And once Jasper sees them, she initially just scoffs them off, thinks that they're a non-threat, even starts making fun of them in various ways, like saying Pearl's defective, that Pearl is defective and useless, Amethyst is overcooked, Garnet's a freak, and Steven, she doesn't even refer to him as a person. She just says, "What's that thing?" Well, Lapis tries saying, "Oh no, he's a human, he's no threat to you," but at this point, Jasper thinks, "I was really not needed here, just blast him." As such, Peridot ends up arming the ship and gets ready to just blast the crystal gems to pieces. But Steven wants to jump in. The gems try to tell Steven, "No, get out of here. We don't want you getting hurt." And Steven pretty much says, "No, this is my home. You are my family. I am not backing down." And as such, as Peridot ends up launching a laser, Steven jumps right in front of the group ready to battle, and his gem is glowing a fierce, bright pink. And as he rushes toward the laser, you suddenly hear a bong, like something hitting a gong, which this gets Jasper's attention. And when she looks to see what caused it, she sees the smoke clears, and she sees that Steven has summoned his shield. Only this time it's much bigger. And this is what finally gets Jasper to want to actually direct her attention to the gems. You see, Jasper admitted the whole reason she came on this trip at all was because she wanted to meet Rose Quartz. Because apparently Jasper was there at the war thousands of years ago. She respected Rose Quartz then and saw her as a worthy opponent. And so she was hoping that by coming to Earth again, she'd be able to meet her in battle once more. But of course, since Rose is not here, she thought that this was just a waste of time. Till she sees that Steven has summoned Rose's shield. At which point she realizes that Steven has Rose's power and mistakenly believes that Steven is Rose. As such, at this point, Jasper starts taking the threat seriously and tells Peridot to just raise the ground and separate everybody. And as such, once that happens, it does cause an explosion that scatters the crystal gems, and Jasper goes right up to Steven and starts demanding to know why Rose took on this form, why he's suddenly so weak and helpless, etc. However, as Jasper ends up grabbing Steven, Garnet comes pretty much right out of the ground and tries to punch Jasper in the face, but Jasper just knocks her aside, especially since she summons her weapon, which I should mention Jasper's gem is literally her nose, and her weapon is a helmet, a very strong helmet. And so when Garnet comes up ready to punch her, Jasper summons the helmet and just headbutts Garnet's fist, causing a giant explosion, causing a massive sound wave, pretty much a massive boom. As such, when Garnet goes in for round 2, Jasper pulls out a weapon, as she calls it a gem destabilizer. What does it do? Pretty much what it says on the tin. Once she turns it on Garnet, it causes Garnet's physical form to start falling apart, quite literally. And yes, it is kind of a horrifying scene because you see the yellow lines spread across Garnet's form, and as they go apart, her body just starts to actually literally fall apart. Her face starts splitting in two. Her arm starts coming off comes off her torso. And the last thing Steven sees of her before she gets poofed is her looking at him in horror as she falls back, and then poof, she poofs with her gems just falling to the ground. As such, the episode ends with Jasper telling Steven that he's lost. Their base is taken, his army's in ruins, and everything is over. It's all capped off with Jasper grabbing Steven, headbutting him, and knocking him out. Which leads us to the next episode, Jailbreak, as that episode opens up with Steven in jail, so to speak, and sporting a very nice shiner right here. It turns out that after Steven got knocked out, Jasper managed to overwhelm the remaining crystal gems, and put simply, they're all in the ship's Hooskow, with the ship launching off into space. Though this ultimately, as we learned, was not the intended plan, because, after all, Peridot wanted to go to Earth for something, and she mentions it to Jasper in passing conversation that she was here to check on the cluster, but Jasper says that rose quartz takes priority, and as she says as she said at the end of the last episode, yellow diamond, as she mentions, we'll learn about her later, won't want to hear about this. So at this point, Jasper's pretty much telling Peridot, screw your mission, this is more important, just fall in line. As such, Peridot reluctantly complies, but Steven, well, once Steven wakes up, he ends up just starts examining his surroundings. And the cells are pretty much just all these cubbies in a wall, with the doors being these yellow energy barriers. Now, if a gem touches the energy barriers, it disrupts their physical form like the disruptors do. But Steven, it does nothing, or at the very least, it just causes a tingling, as when Steven touches the field surrounding his cell, it starts causing those yellow rants to go across his body, but because his body is not a hard light hologram, it just causes him to go, ooh. As such, he's able to leave his cell with relative ease, but as he tries exploring the ship to try and figure out where the rest of the gems are, he ends up finding his neighbor. In this case, another gem. A short little red gem by the name of Ruby, who wears a vest, a headband, shorts, boots, and her hair is a bit poofy and black, and if you actually pay attention, you might notice that it looks a bit familiar. As such, when Steven sees Ruby, he tries getting her attention, and Ruby freaks out, and the instant she sees Steven, she just suddenly gets upset. It's like, oh great, this is just perfect, and she immediately tries getting Steven to just forget about her and stop looking at her. However, she immediately stops talking about that when she realizes Steven's out of his cell, and Steven shows Ruby how he got out, as he manages to use the same trick to open up a little hole in Ruby's cell, as he manages to break her out, and Steven, of course, wants answers as to what's going on, who she is, why she's here, but all that really gets interrupted as they can hear singing throughout the ship, and with Ruby stating that the source of the singing is someone named Sapphire. As such, Steven says he'll help Ruby find Sapphire, and Ruby is just kind of ignoring Steven as they travel throughout the ship. She's just clearly struggling to find Sapphire and just getting more and more desperate. However, in their searches, they end up finding Lapis Lazuli's cell. Steven at first wants to let Lapis out because, well, she's clearly not here of her own volition, but Lapis pretty much tells Steven to knock it off, as she believes that these gems are much stronger than them, and that if they try fighting back, it's just going to make things worse. And as such, the best course of action is just to do nothing, step in line, and hopefully they'll be merciful. Which Steven thinks is dumb, because these people are jerks. They're mean. They came to Earth to hurt the planet. They hurt his friends. They gave him a black eye. Put simply, Steven does not want to bow down to bullies. And he thinks, they may be stronger, but the fact that they're misusing those powers and using them to hurt others is why they should be fighting back. Although, as such, while Steven does tries to inspire Lapis to stand up, Lapis just kind of ignores him and just kind of shuts herself off. As such, Steven decides, you know what, fine, I'll come back for you. But unfortunately, as Steven was talking to Lapis, Ruby pretty much ditched him again to continue looking for Sapphire. And sure enough, Steven continues following the singing, and he does find Sapphire's cell, just as Jasper is telling Sapphire to shut the hell up. This is also where we get the scene where Jasper tells Peridot that rose quartz takes priority, but after Jasper and Peridot leave, with Peridot going back to the bridge to try and pilot them out of here, Steven finds Sapphire's cell and, just like with Ruby, manages to let her out. However, what's strangely enough, as Sapphire is leaving her cell, she actually says, "Thank you, Steven," before Steven has a chance to even introduce himself, which Steven does not catch, but I do. As such, Steven wants to know how she got here as well, but they immediately hear Ruby calling out to Sapphire, and so Sapphire goes running, taking Steven by the hand and just kind of just whooshing around the ship until eventually Sapphire and Ruby meet in this, I want to say, the center of the ship, and once they see each other, it's just a loving embrace as they run right up to each other, and they both immediately ask if they're okay, if the other's okay, if the other gems did anything to them, are they hurt? But pretty much they both confirm it's all good, and immediately Sapphire gives Ruby a big kiss gives a big smooch on her face, and they both just start laughing and hugging and spinning around, and then their forms turn to light. They both merge together, and from them comes Garnet. Yep, it turns out Garnet was a fusion the whole time, which honestly kind of makes sense. When I first saw this episode and learned this revelation, I was like, holy shit. But the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. Garnet is one of the few members of the Crystal Gems with not one gem, but two, with one in both of her hands. And with every gem we've seen up to this point, every single gem has only had one gemstone. Peridot's had it in her forehead, Lapis has a gem in her back, even, like I said, even Jasper has one on her face, and same goes with Amethyst and Pearl, but Garnet has two. And the only times you've ever seen a gem with more than one gem at all is when they're fused together. As such, and on top of that, it does explain quite a few things about Garnet. Why she's so why she liked fusion, why she was so determined to see Steven succeed at fusion, why she has 3 eyes, whereas other gems still look relatively human, and so forth. And on top of that, any fusion she's a part of is a lot bigger than any fusions that are just Pearl and than Opal. So yeah, it's clear. I like that. And as such, Steven, of course, is just in awe that Garnet's a fusion all the time, and Garnet tells Steven that it's fine, that they didn't want to tell him, but it was going to be under different circumstances. We later learned that that Garnet was planning to tell Steven on his birthday, which is actually which I love, because that actually explains how Ruby reacted the way she did when she saw Steven, because essentially she was just struggling to get out of her cell, and then on top of all the other shit they dealt with when Jasper, Peridot, and Lapis came to Earth, Steven saw them before the introduction. Essentially, she went, "Oh, great! Now there's that. That's just perfect." I think that's hilarious. But what I love, and at least another nice moment where Steven actually made a good impression on Ruby and Sapphire. But Garnet says, "It's all right. We already love you." It's sweet, and it gets me right here. However, Garnet tells Steven that he has to go and find the others, because it's clear at this point that Jasper will realize that Ruby and Sapphire, and most likely Steven, have gotten out of their cells. As such, after giving Steven a quick peck on the forehead, like giving him another dose of future vision so we can find where Amethyst and Pearl are, she tells Steven to free them and get to the bridge and get them out of here. As such, Steven leaves, and sure enough, Jasper goes to meet with Garnet, which leads to, honestly, a really awesome fight. In this case, the fight actually starts with Jasper telling Garnet why do you even want to fuse. It's just a trick that weak gems use to become strong. And so, which leads to, honestly, one of the best songs on the show, and one that I actually got on my other phone, "Stronger Than You." It's essentially just Garnet smack talk, and it's pretty much just Garnet smack talking Jasper, talking about how they're stronger together, how they're never going to be apart, and how Jasper just probably angry because she's single. It pretty much is just Garnet rubbing in Jasper's face that she's a fusion, she is here, she is strong, she's proud, and she is going to whoop Jasper's ass, which she starts to, which I think kind of makes sense. The first time they encountered Jasper, most likely it was not an even fight. As we said in the last video, the gems were woefully underprepared for what was going to happen, so they had really no idea what to expect when the homeworld gems are going to come back. But this time, Garnet knows exactly what Jasper's got up her sleeve, and now that she's prepared herself, she's ready to take Jasper on again, and this time she actually puts up a better fight, even managing in the fight to disarm she manages to disarm Jasper by taking away the stabilizer and breaking it in two, making the fight putting the fight on a bit more of an even keel. As such, while this fight's going on, Steven does manage to find Pearl and Amethyst, and they do manage to make it to the bridge, with them ultimately being able to they are able to take down Peridot, wrapping her in Amethyst Whip, while Pearl is able to take control of the ship. Which I do kind of like the control scheme. Essentially, it's like a direct interface with a gem, as all they have to do is put their hands in it, and suddenly they can control the ship, which I think is kind of cool. But as they're doing this, the fight between Jasper and Garnet escalates, and to the point where they end up destroying the floor of the room they're in, which results in them results in the fight going to the core of the ship. And after a few more lyrics and a few more fancy fight scenes, ultimately Garnet's able to land the finishing blow by punching Jasper right into the core of the ship, shattering her helmet and causing the power source to start going haywire. Thankfully, the ship is already turned around and is heading to Earth, but without the power source, the ship is now going to be making a crash landing. As such, Garnet goes to meet with the other gems, but in the resulting chaos, Peridot manages to essentially inchworm her way to a section of the floor and uses that to create an escape pod, which she jettisons right to Earth. In the meantime, when Garnet meets back up with the group, they all huddle together as the ship crashes, and when it finally does crash, it ends up exploding, causing rubble from it to scatter across all of Beach City's beach, as that's where the ship landed. Thankfully, the crystal gems are unharmed because Steven managed to put his bubble up, so they all managed to get out safe and sound. All in a day's work. Good guys won, bad guys lost. Everything's fine, right? Not really. As from the rubble of the ship, Jasper rises back up again, and while she looks battered and bruised, she's not down for the count. As she even states that the only reason they won was because Garnet's a fusion, and if she had a gem to fuse with, she would wipe the floor with their asses. Cue a convenient volunteer. As from the rubble, you also see Lapis, just as battered, most likely from the explosion, and while she initially tried flying away from the rubble, Jasper immediately grabs Lapis's leg and demands that Lapis fuse with her. While Steven tries objecting and tells Lapis that she shouldn't, Jasper starts making the argument that these gems kept you here against your will. They trapped you for 1,000 years, used you for their own ends. But this is your chance to get back at them. If you just fuse with me now. It's honestly a really creepy scene. It's just Jasper just pressuring Lapis to do it. And throughout the scene, because of the lighting and Jasper's expression, it just looks so off-putting. Especially with the way Jasper's smiling with the crazy eyes. It's just, ugh. But ultimately, the talk does seem to get through to Lapis. Again, it seems that way, as she takes Jasper's hand, and they end up dancing. And sure enough, they end up getting synchronized. And with one last slasher smile from Jasper, both of their forms fuse together, resulting in another fusion that I'm just going to say the name of right now: Malachite. A giant multi-armed fusion that seems to has the chest piece, right? That seems to have just, it's got three body sections. It's essentially like a giant insect in terms of body construction, as it has a head which has, I like Malachite's hair. It's a mix of Jasper and Lapis's. It has Lapis's basic hair design while having but it's also made of Jasper's more loose and frilly hair. It's got two pairs of eyes, with the top half looking like Jasper's, the bottom half looking like Lapis's. You can see Jasper's gem like on the face, with obviously Lapis's on the back. And the outfit actually is a nice little fusion of their uniforms, as Jasper's outfit kind of looked like a standard military uniform for Homeworld gems, having a diamond symbol on it, looking more having a crest, etc., but kind of mixing that with Lapis's more casual outfit, as she only had a bikini and a skirt. It just kind of mixes together well, as you see the bikini has now mixed elements of the uniform into it, while the bottom half, well, there's no legs, it just has arms. It's actually kind of it looks very powerful, intimidating, and just not human, which I think works to its advantage, because it's clear that this thing is not nice, and it makes that very much abundant as it sneers and smiles at the crystal gems, and even starts using Lapis's aquakinesis to try and pretty much just wipe the floor with them, creating a giant fist, with the full intent of probably crushing them. However, before Malachite can bring it down, the fist wraps around her arm and turns into a chain. At which point Malachite's wondering what the hell's going on. And it's at this point where Lapis takes over control, As it turns out, this was all a trap on Lapis's part. She is done being everybody's prisoner and decides that Jasper is now going to be hers. As she uses her her powers to pretty much grab as many of Malachite's limbs as she can and dragging her into the ocean. Jasper is of course trying to fight from the inside, but the last thing that Lapis says before they go under is like, let's stay on this planet together before Malachite gets pulled under, with the gems just standing there kind of horrified. And the last line of the episode, and the last thing that any of them say is, Garnet says, "Yikes, those two have got problems." Before the episode ends with Steven getting a phone call from Connie, who is now returning Steven's message. So, okay, I just spent a half hour explaining the plot of both episodes. So, what are my thoughts on this two-parter? I think it's really damn good. I honestly really think it's damn good. It's nice to actually see plot lines kind of come to a head here. Well, like the Lapis Lazuli, here's kind of the thing that I mentioned. I think I might have mentioned the Lapis Lazuli two-parter. As I mentioned before, how the structure of Steven Universe is like that of a video game, and how that typically operates with Steven Universe is that as you go along in the series, the threats tend to escalate. The first big threat that the gems fought in this case was Lapis Lazuli, who was not just a standard gem monster but a full-on gem, which opened up who not only was a bigger threat than the standard enemy fare, but was also someone that opened up the possibility that there was more to the gem's mission than just fighting monsters. And now and as such, from there, we learned more and more tidbits of the gem's history. That they fought against their homeworld, that the homeworld was doing something bad, that they were creating soldiers at the cost of the planet and its infrastructure, and just little things that kept building up. And as throughout those little things, we saw more of the enemy. We were introduced to Peridot and learned that she was trying to get back to Earth for whatever reason. We saw her attempts continually foiled by the gems, which in turn made her more and more desperate to get the information, to the point where she finally went to drastic measures in this episode, when she finally just went to Earth herself with a guard. In this case, Jasper, who was just supposed to be there as hired muscle to keep the gems from screwing with Peridot's work, and Lapis, who is their informant, albeit unwillingly. As such, to kind of bring it all together, it really does feel like a culmination of the story thus far. As well, and not only do we finally get more clarification on the conflict that happened thousands of years ago, but we learned it was a lot deeper than we saw in the episodes building up to it. Like with Steven, when we were first introduced to the gems, they were just introduced to us as like a superhero team, as a group of superpowered beings from another world who fought monsters and protected people. But the problem is, we're never told why they do this. We never told what compels them to do this. Is it their duty? Is it their job? Is that because they're the magical guardians of Earth? No. They're space fugitives, and they're protecting the planet because their people came to this planet with the intent of conquering it and turning it into a gem harvesting ground, which we saw with the kindergarten. They fought back. They not only fought back against Homeworld, but it was a full-on war like Greg said, with full-on casualties, with people dying. And so once you kind of learn that, it kind of puts everything we've seen up to this point in a new perspective. The gems aren't just protecting the Earth because, well, they want to do the right thing. They're protecting the Earth because, and as Greg put it, they're trying to make up for what they did before. It puts a whole new spin on everything that really brings it up from just standard superhero fighting to a very much deeper reason. The gems aren't just protecting the Earth because they care about the life on here. They're protecting the Earth because they feel they're responsible for the damage caused to it. The gem mutants, the war, the stuff with Lapis, which actually further explains why Lapis was treated as the enemy. The gems most likely had no idea if she was friend or foe, but if she was trapped in a mirror, they didn't want to risk the chance, hence why they freaked out when Lapis showed up. And on top of that, now forces from Homeworld are once again coming back And the last time that it also kind of explains why why the gems freaked out as bad as they did when Peridot was trying to get to Earth. Because the last time the Homeworld gems came to Earth, it was a slaughter fest. Again, a war happened, and the gems that we see in the show are what's left of Rose's army. A whole army, probably made of hundreds of thousands of gems, reduced to three. And those three were in this case Rose, Garnet, and Pearl. Well, technically four because Garnet's a fusion, but at the same time, with Amethyst just being a happy accident because, well, she stayed in the ground too long. I'll get to that later. But put simply, it makes it clear that the battle was not just a battle. It was something greater, something more damaging, and the gems are afraid of history repeating itself. Hence why they reacted the way they did when Peridot showed up. Why they've been trying so desperately to keep her from coming back to Earth. And on top of that, when they got Lapis's message when they got Lapis's message in the message episode, it made them realize that the Homeworld gems returning to Earth was inevitable, and they were most likely outclassed. It's a very, as such, with all that in perspective, with their entire history and with Lapis's revelation that things on Homeworld have changed to the point where the technology is so far advanced that even they wouldn't recognize it, of course they would be freaking out the way they were. Of course they'd be sending Steven off. Because in this battle, they're not the superheroes defending the Earth from the alien invaders. They're a small rebel team against their own people who vastly outnumber them 1,000,000 to 1. And very much the idea of even being able to come out on top in this battle is a pipe dream. It's actually it kind of makes everything feel much heavier from here on out, as now you start to realize the deck is very much stacked against them. That pretty much anything that causes them to clash with anything from Homeworld could result in total obliteration. And even in this episode, just a small fraction of Homeworld's best almost managed to beat them. The only reason that things turned out well in the end was because Homeworld thought Steven was like any other gem. But because he was half human, he was just able to walk out of his cell and is able to free his friends. So ultimately, they only got by the skin of their teeth in that regard. But even then, they still fought a very strong opponent in the form of Jasper, who ultimately, I think, acted as the next boss for this phase of the show, as she was able to challenge the gems in ways that they hadn't before. With her coming in, not only did she bring forces the gems could not possibly understand, but she also brought superior strength, superior power, and while Lapis could be reasoned with and was talked down by Steven, Jasper does not want to talk. Jasper is here to fight, and she will use whatever method she has available to ensure that she comes out on top and you bite the dust. It's very much clear. It's once again an escalation. While Lapis is most likely the more powerful of the two gems, Jasper makes up for it by the fact that she is outright hostile. Lapis was hostile too, but again, her motivations were that she just simply wanted to go home. Jasper, well, she already has a way home. She genuinely just wants. The only reason she even sticks around is because she thinks Steven is his mom. So yeah, she's really just here to kick your ass and tell you to like it. And with the weapon, and with her power, and with the weapon she has at her disposal, it pretty much makes it clear that the gems, when they first fought her, were outclassed. But again, it also makes the victory in the second part of the episode of this two-parter that much better, as Steven is able to get his friends together, Garnet is able to reform, and is able to take on Jasper on a more even keel, because now they've had a chance to lick their wounds. They know what they're up against now, and with Steven's aid, they're able to mount a counterattack. In this case, ultimately, they're not fighting all of Homeworld. They just gotta make sure this ship doesn't get off Earth, which they ultimately succeed in. As they end up crashing the ship directly into Beach City, Jasper is defeated by Garnet, who now knows not to fall for the destabilizer trick again. And with the ship being destroyed, they no longer have to worry about whatever threat Homeworld is facing, for now at least, because like I said, Peridot did manage to escape in the end. But even then, the episode still leaves enough plot threads open for future episodes, as while you once again have seen the enemy, and you know more about the history of the show and more about the bad guys, At the same time, there's still things that need to be. There's still loose threads here. In this case, Jasper and Lapis are still out there in the form of Malachite, and well, ultimately, while Lapis is keeping Jasper tied down, that still doesn't mean that she'll be gone. That they're down for the count for good. So it's still out there, and of course, like I mentioned, Peridot crashed on Earth, and since her whole plan was that she wanted to get to Earth for some reason, that means finding her does take a bit of priority. Ultimately, it really does bring together a lot of the plot threads that we've been seeing up to this episode 2 ahead, and I think delivers on them perfectly, with amazing action, some great character moments, some nice lighting and shading, and I do love the characters' reactions to all the serious nature. When Steven finally realizes just how deep and just how deep things are, and how this isn't just a battle of good versus evil, this is a battle of the little guy versus a giant. It really does hit. You can see how much is affecting him emotionally, physically, and so forth. While he does a good job at hiding it as he tries his best to maintain his composure, you can see him becoming more determined, more angry. He's no longer for those moments, he's not the wide-eyed kid he was at the beginning of the series. He's not the kid that said, "Hey, I want to be part of this too." He's a kid that says, "No, I have to be a part of this, because if I don't, people I love will die." I love that. It's great character development and helps showcase that Steven has learned, has grown, and when he finally realizes the severity of the situation, he doesn't just knuckle under and say, "I can't do this." No, he stands his ground and says, "Even if I can't do this, I have to still try." I love that. It's great character development. And speaking of character development, it's also nice that we learn a bit more about the characters themselves. In this case, Garnet. I loved the revelation that she was a fusion, as it really opened up a lot more angles and character development for her, especially with the reveal of Ruby and Sapphire. And and Garnet, I think, is another example of why I love fusion as a concept in Steven Universe. Because, spoiler alert, this is not the last time we'll be seeing Ruby and Sapphire in the show. And Ruby and Sapphire have very distinct and unique personalities, which we do see briefly in this episode. Ruby's kind of a hothead and doesn't really think rationally. When she sees Steven for the first time, the first thing that she thinks of is, "Oh, you got freed." She thinks, "Oh shit, the whole surprise is ruined now." And it takes her a second to register that Steven's out of his cell before she starts asking questions. Whereas with Sapphire, she immediately asks questions and thinks, "Wait, how'd you get out?" And while Ruby was asking questions about how Steven was able to interact with the energy door, Sapphire's like, "Oh, that makes sense, actually." They're very much polar opposites, but at the same time, they do click well together, and ultimately they complement one another. And you see that in Garnet, as we've seen Garnet's personality throughout the series. She can be very calm and composed, but she can get emotional, Sometimes she can be very selective. Sometimes she can be very nice and approachable, while other times she can be very much a hardhead. And I think that's what I find most interesting here. After this revelation in the series, many people were wondering how much of Garnet in the series up to this point was Ruby or Sapphire. But the thing is, it was neither. One of the things that I really do like about fusion, I have talked about this before, I think, is that ultimately the fusion is not one of the gems, but at the same time, it's not them either. Garnet is ultimately what happens when you take two distinct personalities on two opposite ends of the spectrum and combine them together. You got hothead and rash Ruby mixed with calm, collected, and calculating Sapphire. Both of them are two very different gems with two very different abilities. I'm just going to say this right now. Ruby has fire powers and Sapphire has ice powers. So when they bring them together, you get Garnet, who's somewhere in the middle. Sometimes she displays personality traits of one gem over the other, but at the end of the day, she's not Ruby or Sapphire, she's Garnet, which I like. I like stuff like that. And on top of that, it also showcases a very clear lesbian relationship in the series. They don't gloss around it. I saw Sapphire kiss Ruby on the face, and it's adorable. I like it. And yes, with the revelation that Garnet's a fusion, it does make me want to know more and more about Ruby and Sapphire. Just you introduce those new characters, you want to learn more about them. So overall, I think this two-parter is really damn good. It brings together all the plot threads that have been established so far. Finally explains what happened that caused the crystal gems to fight against Homeworld, as well as indirectly explaining how the crystal gems were formed. It explains why they fight the fight they do. That ultimately it introduces a new threat in the form of Jasper and the threat of Homeworld. Still leaves enough plot threads open so that you'll still know what's going on. As Peridot even mentioned, they were there to check on the cluster, though we don't get any answers on that. And so with Peridot still out there and Lapis taking Jasper and the Malachite fusion and trapping them beneath the ocean, it's clear there's still more that's gonna happen in the future. So overall, I think this is a really damn good two-parter. Not perfect. That's not perfect, but I liked Stronger Than You. It did feel kind of I still openly admit it felt a little odd to offset it to have it be played over the fight scene, which it's a cool fight scene. They're both good. It's just it feels kind of weird, especially with how upbeat the Stronger Than You song is and how intense the battle is. That's just a minor nitpick at best. The fight scene and the song are still badass, and honestly, I think they're really good and fitting when you actually stop until eventually it really does work. Hell, when I first saw that scene, I was just kind of singing along to the song, so whatever. That's just a nitpick at best. It's a minor nitpick overall. In the end, both the two-parter is still really damn good. Like I said, brings together all these plot threads, has really great action, really great character moments, has some really nice designs and use of colors, especially with setting the mood with lighting in certain points. It has a lot of good revelations. It still lays plot threads down for future episodes to build upon, and overall, I think it's just a damn good time. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week where we finally wrap up the first season of Steven Universe and see just how the Gems and Steven have to deal with the aftermath of fighting back against Homeworld. So until then, I hope you have a good night, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.